Thank you, Sunil. So now everybody's fed. We hope to provide some lively debate over these exciting findings. And Sarah, you're the only woman of science among a bunch of men in media or writers, so it's only fair that we start with you. And I wanted to ask, what did you think was the most surprising finding of the 10? Or the most interesting finding for you?
For me, it was the finding with regards to stability over democracy. From that perspective, I see a large shift from the time of the Arab Spring into focusing on what really matters to youth. So if we compare it to one of the other findings, which was with regards to what are they looking for in a country that they'd like to move to, and what they mentioned was that they're looking for opportunity, a safe and secure place to live. So basically a place where they can build a future, a place that allows them and provides them with the opportunity to achieve their dreams. And that shows a shift from let's change the government to a shift towards let the people that are currently in the jobs as leaders actually do their jobs well and allow us to have the right environment that we deserve and the right environment that they're entitled to. They don't even deserve. It's a basic human right that they're entitled to grow and prosper in whatever country that they're currently living in.
Interesting. But do you think this is a rejection of democracy itself, or basically a result of what happened over the past 5 years in the countries that saw the turmoil?
For me, I don't think it's an issue of doctrine and what governs different countries. It's an issue of what really matters for them. During the Arab Spring, what they were demanding is stability and opportunity and basically jobs. Countries that they revolted in were not heard. They did not have their basic human rights. They had problems internally within the countries, and they were demanding for a better life for themselves, a life that they thought was attainable with proper governance. So I don't think it's a rejection of democracy over anything else. It's a request for their clear human basic rights of security and feeling safe in their own countries and being able to develop and prosper in the country. So to build their countries up from where they are and to actually move towards the future and not be stuck in limbo at some point during the timeline of life.
Okay. Interesting. I'd like to move to Khalid. And the interesting thing is that people, based on the findings, are seeking stability to get jobs. But won't you think that in the countries that saw the uprisings or the revolts, there was a problem of jobs to begin with, and that was a driver in those uprisings?
I do think so, that the lack of jobs, unemployment, also there was injustice. The Arab media is a very subservient media, and it never brought to the fore all what was happening before. So I think there were many issues that were under the carpet, and just the Arab Spring was the catalyst that got them out. But I was sort of surprised by number 7.7, where the young people wanted to have more say. They want democracy, not democracy, human rights, and also rights for women. People across the Arab world in the 18 to not only 24, 18 to 44 would like to be stakeholders. They just do not want to be standing on the side and being mere spectators. They want to be passengers on the road of progress in life. I mentor a lot of young people in Saudi Arabia. One of the things they have is why everything is decided for us. Okay, we don't want defense nor foreign affairs, but things concerning education, social movement, health, all these things are very vital to these people. And you can see more and more people writing about them, using the new social media and coming up with so many ideas. And I think if government leaders who read this report do not take heed, then I think there will be other springs or winters or whatever it is. So it's very important for us to focus on these people. Also, the other thing is that the Arab societies on two levels are detrimental to young people. Number one, partly they are tribal societies. So communication comes from up to down. And they're also in cities, they're patriarchal societies. So the young people do not have a voice. But right now, I think people are coming up and using this social media, they're getting their points across.
Roy, I want to ask you, given that Khaled brought up point number 7, how do you reconcile 6 and 7? How do you reconcile the fact that they want stability, but also they want to be heard as well?
I think it's really the difference between must-have and good-to-have. The must-have is my basic rights of a decent living, a decent job. And then if I accomplish that, it will be good to have democracy. And it's unfortunate because the democracy and freedom of speech became a luxury in a way in the youth. But there is another phenomenon. These are millennials. And you find that phenomena around the world is very much me, myself, and I. First, I need to fulfill my needs. I need to have all what will make me as a person individualistic. And then I could think about societal change, societal evolution. And I think that's where also we need to realize that.
A very interesting thing. Shakar, I know you also chose, when I asked you about the most interesting thing, you chose an amalgamation of 2 findings, if you can share this with us.
Well, I think that out of the 10 findings, there is one finding that's in between the lines. Right now, the international community, a lot of Arab countries involved as well, we're actually working on fighting terrorism. We are working on fighting radicalization. And then when we look at these 10 findings that are from Arab youth, we actually have the tools. And these are in 3 fields. We need more diplomacy in the Arab world. I mean, whether we saw like Saudi Arabia and Iran, how there's a huge difference between the Levant and the GCC countries. But we do need this one leader to step up and actually call for diplomacy, for all parties to actually talk. I mean, we're seeing it work in Cuba. Now an American can go to Cuba.
After 60 years, though.
Exactly, yeah. So actually we can learn from that, and we are moving in a very fast world today. So this is one of the things. Diplomacy is important right now. We shouldn't be feeding the anger of people. We shouldn't be feeding the differences of opinions of who am I friend with and who am I enemy with. We should be shifting that to actually bringing people to one table. And then opportunity. I mean, speaking from personal experience, I left the Arab world because I couldn't find opportunity here. I went to exile, which I call home today, Canada. And we need to also focus on opportunity. I mean, if we're giving opportunity to people, we're not going to see them, and the survey showed that, we're not going to see them going to join ISIS. And when I was interviewing people in the last years there, that was a common thing. It's like I see it doesn't make sense to a lot of us, but when you can't, take care of your family and you can't take care of your mother in a lot of these countries, as we saw as well in the survey, then we need to start putting focus on that. I mean, we're putting focus on military intervention. So let's put more focus on these things that this survey, I think, is very important for policymakers today, and freedoms.
But Khaled, is it as simple as this? Basically, somebody rising up and say, let's talk together? I mean, we've seen a lot of these initiatives, and it led to naught, basically.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, while I do agree with what you said, but there's something else. The ideological narrative of Daesh is very strong. Let's not fool ourselves. The preachers in the mosques, the people who write, the hidden hands that move, and I see it in Saudi Arabia more. I don't know about other states. So we have to accept the fact that these preachers of hatred have not been put aside. The governments before used them in the Arab world. I mean, they used religion as one of the surveys said that people talk about focus of religion is more. But at the same time, I truly believe that it's not easy just talk to them of foreign policy. You have to cut at the root cause. These preachers and these writers and these people who spread and foment hatred among people. So it's not that the Saudis who have gone down there, and many of them went for ideological purposes, not for they didn't have jobs. You had a doctor who is a graduate from Scotland, Blow himself, an accountant working in a well-known auditing firm, goes to Syria. Why does he go? He's got a job. He's earning 14,000 riyals, which is like about 13,000 dirhams a month. So there is something missing. We have to really look out. The educational system also has to weed out so many of these, points of hatred that have crept in over the past few years.
you're raising a good point on the education system, and this, Sarah, you're a product of the education system in the UAE, right? Am I right? And is that where you think we should be shifting the focus on, shifting the focus away from subjects that would contribute to this cultural divide or this ideological war, and more into like practical, I don't want to oversimplify it, but more practical sciences and the like? I mean, how do you win this ideological war anyway?
From my end, at least, I don't see a lot of focus here in the UAE towards religion. Perhaps there was a large number from the GCC. Tolerance, I think, is the key factor that needs to be taught throughout the years, and throughout the different years, and especially at a younger age. I believe that's what I was exposed to. So I was exposed to different cultures. I was exposed to people from different backgrounds. I grew up with people with different religions and with different beliefs. And for me, that was okay. So it was.
But you're a minority in this. The majority of people would actually have perhaps the opposite experience.
Probably yes, and probably that's true, and that's why I'm talking about my own experience. And perhaps this is the way to do it: is to be exposed to different ways of thinking, to be exposed to different kinds of people, to be exposed to people from different backgrounds and people that share different thoughts from a very early age. Because one, you learn adaptability very well, so you learn to adapt to every situation, and two, you learn to always think of the other person's perspective before you can jump into conclusions, and before you can make certain judgments on what's truly right in this world and what's truly wrong in this world, and who's the dominant, let's say, sort of race or faith over everyone else. It gives you that momentary pause and appreciation, because you know people from different backgrounds, and you know who they are as humans, and you understand that those differences and cultural differences and probably religious differences and beliefs are parts of those people, but they're not what they are all about.
Roy, I want to ask you how easy you think is to achieve this, and would you say that after 5 years of deepening turmoil, we've actually done anything significant to address the root causes of what we're seeing right now?
I think evidently there is what happened in the region and historically is a societal evolution. And within that societal evolution, where we move from a tribal family structure, i.e. larger family, to more nucleus family, that's where first a sense of insecurity has instilled among youth. Because I can't rely anymore on my larger aspect, I need to rely on myself, which creates obviously a lot of this. The other problem is, I think, that conflict between ideology and identity, whatever is the ideology, religious or not. And I think that there is very little differentiation, because the education system in itself does not celebrate, and that's very important, I think, diversity in identities. And therefore, either I belong or I'm out of the mainstream in a way. And I think all these aspects contributed a lot to that tension that exists among youth. And sometimes it leads to radicalization, because when suddenly ideology and identity becomes one, this is when people become radical. And hence, I think the educational system failed in one fundamental thing. It's celebrating the diversity of opinion, of attitude, of life, and all its various aspects. And this is, I think, the biggest failing within the education system that we had. It was too monolithic for a modern living and what people are exposed to.
And are there any signs that this is changing, that we're moving beyond that?
You know, when you change education, it cannot be a short-term thing, and that's the danger. That problem appeared, and with Khalid, I think, in many sessions in Saudi, back in the 80s, if I remember, we talked a lot about the need of changing the educational system. That was in the 80s.
In the 80s,
and that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we still didn't know much about it. And you don't change an education system because if I'm 18 today, it's too late. But effectively, it's a generational thing. And rethinking the whole curriculum, in a way, of the educational system and the way we approach education is really a long-term task, which hopefully will start one day.
But Shakir, does that mean that we've lost your generation? We've lost a couple of generations? you know, in the failure to actually make any significant changes in education? I mean, you know, your story is remarkable. You told me you were born in Beirut, you know, but then you moved to Canada, right?
Yeah.
You could have been easily radicalized. You could have been easily exposed to, you know, many domestic, you know, problems. You were lucky enough to get out. Others maybe are not so lucky. I mean, what do you think of this?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to go back to one point, because, by the way, this is hard for me. Like, this is a serious event. Usually, I'm more in the fun events. So just to talk in here.
We can be
me
fun.
and you. When I mentioned the whole, Mr. Khalid was talking about ideology, I was focusing on opportunity. The Arab Youth Survey today shows me that it is opportunity that the youth, 18 to 24 in this survey, are identifying the lack of opportunity as the reason for joining ISIS. So I do, you know, in another context, I'll talk about ideology, I'll talk about all these other issues. But even from my travels in the Middle East, opportunity, and I want to use this platform today, from the attendees and from people, you know, watching us now, we need to focus on opportunity in the Arab world. Like, I don't want to see a lot of me in the future. I want to actually see people that stay in the Arab world. I want to see leaders actually encouraging that with policy, encouraging that with, you know, with employment opportunity. And I always have to bring this up. As a former Palestinian refugee, refugees, which are now, we have a lot of refugees in the Middle East, till today, till now, they're not getting access to employment. We are doing a good job with education. I mean, my generation, even in refugee camps in Lebanon, my parents' generation, they went to school. UNRWA, the United Nations Relief for Workers Agency, did invest in education. And it was great education. I can vouch for it. I mean, I went to Canada and I really felt strong in my class because of that education system. But if you have education and you don't have employment to follow, and this is where the opportunity comes, then you will lose the current generation. And we are losing my generation, sadly. We are seeing a lot of young people joining radical groups. We're seeing a lot of young people immigrating to Europe, even having to illegally immigrating to Europe, crossing seas. We're seeing all these things. So putting all this aside, I just want to like re-mention this again and again and again. I don't think it's hard to actually achieve this fast. I think that we could be investing more on, you know, on the workforce. Why does a refugee can't obtain a work permit to most countries? Why does it take forever? Why am I, as a Canadian, I can go to country X in my own home origin and get a work permit within a week or a month, but my brother, who is still a Palestinian refugee, cannot obtain a work permit? So let's address these things. If we want to fight terrorism, policymakers need to put a focus on that.
But mentioning investing and mentioning opportunity, I mean, in some way it feels like the perfect storm. You have, sorry.
But if I may, I think also on the education front, there is an issue. When we go back to the system, there is two aspects of education. Yes, there are the engineers and the sociologists and the lawyers and the doctors, but there is also a system that prepares people for what economies need. And I don't think we're doing the educational system as it's structured on the technical side of things. I don't think we're doing enough also, and that's what creates job opportunities. We have an oversupply in certain markets, take Egypt, for example, of lawyers in the market, but we lack the technical people, yep. You know, mechanics, plumbing, you know, all these jobs are looked down at, where actually these are also job opportunities. Yep. And I think we need to celebrate jobs. Any job well done should be celebrated. And I think we don't do enough of that. We always aim too high, where, you know, there are so many opportunities within an economy.
We're listing a whole host of challenges, and on that, and on investing in opportunity, one of the other issues now is the difficulty in creating jobs in the current environment of low oil prices. And you mentioned in the 80s, people were talking about investing in education or changing the education system. And as far as I can remember, being an economics journalist, for example, the IMF kept urging countries in the Arab world, the GCC, to diversify their economies, to lower subsidies when oil prices were high. Now we have oil at $40 a barrel. Budgets are coming under increasing strain. And I mean, one of the most interesting topics for me is that the majority of Arab youth want subsidies and want the government largesse to remain. How do you reconcile this, and how do you address it?
If I may answer, there was no fiscal or economic policies. Money was flowing in. The banks were bankrolling everything that was going on. We had gigantic projects. A hospital will have a chandelier worth $2 million. I mean, the waste that was there. And I think we are paying for our follies of the past. Now, the other thing is also the failure of society. When these kids know that oil prices are going down, and yet they want subsidy. And I asked a couple of people. He said, you ask me, why should I give away my subsidy? I want people, our leaders, to be role models. They should have fiscal responsibility. The three words that are spoken now in Saudi Arabia is adl, which is justice, hawkama, which is governance, and muhasaba, which is accountability. People are writing and tweeting about this. So you have to have leaders in the Arab world who will lead from the front and by example, who will be prudent, who will also be frugal in their spending habits, who will not indulge in luxury. If they do that, then also I'll do away with my subsidy.
Isn't this too much of a political risk? Lowering subsidies, changing things, at a time against the backdrop of rising regional turmoil?
You've got to rise up. I mean, you have to rise up to things that are changing. Wake up and smell the coffee. And the Arab leaders should know this, at least the people in the Gulf. And there is now a sustained effort to improve things. But right now also, and by the way, the Gulf is not one entity. I'm totally against these foreign reporters from Europe and others who come and think of us totally different. For example, the problems in Saudi Arabia are 150% different from the issues that are there in the UAE and all. Like, for example, here you have an open economy. As Sheikh Mohammed said, welcome. Down there you can get a visa. So there are certain issues that have to be carried. And our friend said that as a refugee, he can go to Canada. People can't even, legitimate businesses can't come to certain areas of the Gulf. So we have to really reorganize and do a transformation in the real sense of the word.
But back to the issue of subsidies, for example, because this is one of the key things that governments are trying to do. And for example, we interviewed the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago, and he said he wants to generate about $30 billion from subsidy restructuring by 2020. Sarah, you live in a country that removed subsidies for transport fuel. Were you okay with that? But most importantly, how were others around you looked at that when it happened? Oil prices are now low, but it means that if oil is up at $100 a barrel again, or 80 or 90, you will be paying much, much more at the pump.
That's true. I'd like to actually go back to the numbers, and we see a generation that are 18 to 24. It's not because they don't appreciate that we are at a time where there is a lower cost per barrel, but they were born into this, where everything was subsidized: water, your fuel for your cars, your electricity on a daily basis. This is all they understand. This is all they know. This is all their siblings know and learn about it. And it's more of an entitlement that I was born here, we're an oil-producing country, and therefore it is okay for me to get subsidized oil or subsidized byproducts of oil because it's here. It's our oil. And the transition and understanding that this country needs to actually evolve and develop into a country that can compete economically with the global world, that can sustain itself without that large influx of money that's coming into into oil and is actually supporting the rest of the sectors. And the shift that I'd like to point at that is currently in the works here in the UAE to actually gain acceptance for that is the changing in the way that the government is performing. The government is looking at the future, and the government is saying, strap your belts, all of you, and you need to look at the future. There will be no oil at some point, and we need to sustain this country as a competitive country in the world, as a country that is sustains the levels that it's at, that gets those numbers where it is the number one in different areas, and can actually move forward from that. Personally, I did not think that it was a wrong thing to do to remove those subsidies. It is a stepped approach. So you'd start with one thing and then start moving to other things. We've gotten opportunities growing up here with those subsidies to actually pick up from a nation the nation has been around for under 45 years. And those subsidies were there to incentivize the growth and the development of the country. So education was heavily spent on, health was spent on, the future of the youth, so getting everybody educated, getting everybody through schools and very good schools, and then through universities and very good universities, and providing that infrastructure for them, is for them to eventually come, which is my generation, I think, is the one that has lived through all the glories of the country and has received all the glories of the country. It is now our turn to actually work like everyone else in the world towards building a more sustainable economy. And removing subsidies is one way of doing it. Future taxation may be even another way of doing it, but you need to sustain a country, and that's how a country is sustained without living on oil.
Yeah. Roy, what Sarah just said must feature in any, business risk analysis in this region. And you have governments talking about, Saudi governments talking about privatizing a lot of services. Do you actually think these changes can pull it off in such a short span of time?
Why is it a business risk to lift subsidies? And, you lead by example. And I want to pick up where Khalid has left, where when you have excesses and people feel there is excesses, don't ask me to make an effort. But if there is a feeling that the whole nation is making an effort, then I'll accept more readily these subsidies. It's human nature, that's one thing. And I go back to the sustainability. Of course, that taxation is going to come. We all lived, and most of us work for companies, and we lived in an environment where there was high taxation, and we gladly paid so because we got a return from that taxation. No taxation without representation, or no taxation without benefit. And if I'm getting the benefit, then I'm gladly going to pay the taxation. And I think I don't call that a business risk. On the contrary, it's creating a sustainable economy for us business people to be able to look at the long term in this area rather than what has been the case in the past. Many companies, be it multinational or local, have been extremely opportunistic in the way they looked at these markets.
But Khalid, do you think, for example, Saudis will accept paying taxation anytime soon? And I'd like to, on the sustainable economy, there's a fascinating IMF study in 2014 that points out historical experience shows it takes about 2 decades to diversify the economy.
Yeah, if I may, when the UK lifted subsidies in the 70s and 80s with the Thatcher era, it took 9 years to lift these subsidies. It's a process. It's not something that you do overnight.
Yeah.
And that's the process that we need to accept, of course.
Khalid, do you think there will be acceptance to this among, nationals in some countries?
Well, I think if you cut across the board, and yes, from A to Z, I think people would accept it, but it has to be gradual. As Roy said, it can be done overnight, and then there are different strokes for different folks, so you have to devise ways, whether it's going to be a salary income tax, or you have a VAT, or you have a zakat tax, and also I think we have to devise our own methodology, but at the same time, as I said, it should cut across the board, and not just a certain segment or a certain class of people who do it. And this is what has been expressed all the time by people.
So I think we have some time to open the floor for questioning for a few questions. Please keep the question brief and to the point to any of the panel members. There's a mic here. Come on. Nobody wants to get taxed.
I thought I'm away from taxes, and you guys are talking about taxes. I got scared in my seat.
Well, I mean, you live in Canada. I mean, you
guys are excited for taxes. I want to talk to you in 10 years. You guys are many expats are going to be heading back. I don't know. Taxes it's a good thing. I can't talk about the last subject because I don't live here. But we have a saying, there are two things you should be scared of, death and the tax man. So I think a lot of you...
That if you don't report properly.
Well, no, you report properly, and they go, don't do that. They're watching right now. I have a flight this week.
Is there anybody among the people here would like to ask the panel member questions? Please.
Hello, I have a little question for you, Chaka. What would be the one thing that would bring you back to this region, back from Canada?
Well, I like coming back. I'm here right now. So you
yeah,
see,
but I mean for good.
When I see, right now, thank God, I have already sort of figured it out in life. But when I see my people, because, you know, I'm a Palestinian and I'll always be a Palestinian. When I see my people treated well by Arab governments, given access to the job market, able to travel, I'm not even opening the discussion of the right of return. That's something way bigger than me and you and everyone in here. But just as us Arabs, I know my region is amazing, hospitable. I love coming to the Gulf. So when this hospitality gets extended to so many refugees, then I think, you know, I'll come back. But I love Canada too much too, and I love the States and all the world. But yeah.
Anybody else with questions? Well, you know, one question for me to you, Shakir, again. So do you think this is, sorry, no, great, please, yes, please go ahead.
This is to everybody on the panel. Do you feel there's a disconnect between the way people are graduating, the skills they have when they graduate from universities, and the jobs that are available today?
I think that's for you, Roy.
Definitely. I think definitely. You know, if you take the example of Germany, where they achieve high employment rates in a way, or low unemployment, is because the planning start by the age of 14. They identify what the economy will need, what are the jobs that are needed, and they direct based on people's skills. The problem in the Arab world, and being an Arab father myself, we all want our kids to be, you know, either engineers or doctors. We were talking earlier, Khalid and I, about this. And we don't value, in a way, technocratic job, in a way, or technical jobs per se. And it's like, it's a shame on the family that I don't have all my kids at university, irrelevant if they are happy or not. We forget a fundamental thing. Happy people or happy kids automatically works better, you know, and I think the German example is a good example to look at because they develop people for their job market and their economical needs. We do very little of that in our economies, at least. You know, and the other problem is we love tangible and infrastructure thing. You know, like you have the whole soft economy from, you know, film industries, from entertainment industry, etc., that still is at its infancy in the Arab world, and that could take a lot of jobs. And that, again, we're under. What we do is every time there is an expansion in the economy or the oil prices are high, we love building buildings, you know, which we might create 500 concierge jobs, and that's it. Yeah. But basically, we really need to plan better the economy versus, or job needed versus the economical needs.
Actually, I'd like to follow up with this, and then we'll have one more question. You know, to the two GCC nationals that we have, basically GCC nationals have been, you know, the perception is they only are interested in top management jobs. With the economy changing, with supposedly the push to diversify, with lower oil prices, do you, Sarah, see this changing as well? You know, for, you know, people just to take whatever decent jobs available?
Not in the short term, I think. Not in the current generations that are there. If we want to get a point where such jobs are acceptable, because they're not all jobs are acceptable. Not all jobs are okay for somebody so there are jobs that parents wouldn't dream their kids would be towards. We still have that drive that you're going to university, whether you like it or not, you're getting a college degree. And skills is something that you can work on after you get your college degree if you find a job in it. Otherwise, you're taking the job that has the best pay or the best future outlook, regardless of what you even studied at university. So I don't think it's it's something that this generation needs to happen, and I don't think there's a move towards having them become more acceptable. The only way that we can do it is to actually go down the chain to children that are between 5 and 10, the ones that are currently evolving into their acceptances of what things are right, what things are okay, and the perceptions of those things, and start working from there. But I don't think there's a current drive towards working there. And perhaps the UAE's case is different because UAE nationals are such a small number that the UAE still requires highly skilled in terms of the development of the country. In terms of the development of the country towards a knowledge-based economy, there's a high demand for high knowledge workers, and that would be the focus of the country moving forward. So I don't think there will be still a shift into the lower ones. Perhaps a shift into diversifying what does management mean and where, for example, can an engineer work or where can a scientist work, and expanding the opportunities within the realms of the current sort of high education-driven careers rather than the skill-based careers.
I salute your candor on this, truly. I think, Khalid, it's changing already in Saudi Arabia.
Well, it's changing. I think it's economic diktat that decides, because when you have no jobs and you want to be a mudir, quote unquote, a manager, then the next best is a deputy mudir. And if you don't, then you become a supervisor, or you become a mu'aggib that take passports to the passport office and all. But that also has been killed because now there's the IT and the Ministry of Interior and others, they deal through the internet and all. I think also the social norms are the main obstacles of people going to do. I'm not talking about menial jobs, because they will never do it, because we in the Gulf have been taught that we are a super race. Unfortunately, our media, our people, the societal regulations and rules and whatever it is have made us that the Gulf boy or girl is somebody who's sacrosanct. He will never do something that touching his, something with his hands and all. But I think social norms and the economy is going to decide what we do in the future.
I think we have time for one more question, please.
Thank you. Just picking up on this point of employment, we hear a lot about all the panelists talking of the need for employment and almost looking to governments to provide that employment. I'm wondering what the perspective is in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation, two words we normally hear a lot about but haven't been mentioned at all in this discussion. Do the young people have a role within entrepreneurship and innovation to become future job creators as well as simply employees?
Do you want any specific member
anyone from the panel who might have a perspective on that?
I think where the greater opportunity is on entrepreneurship, and we're seeing that, and there are different bodies, and there are various initiatives in many, many markets. Lebanon, for example, have created a central bank fund. Egypt is creating an entrepreneurship body. You have Endeavor, who's very active in many. WAMDA is another example. And that's why I mentioned the soft economy, because this is where the entrepreneurship opportunities are, because they are normally low capital intensive, which means accessibility to create these jobs is easy, and they are job creator. But I think that there is a lot of initiative in Saudi, in the UAE, little bit everywhere actually, where either the central banks are giving low interest fund, or private sector also are creating themselves as part of their good corporate citizenship in a way, these funds to allow youth to come into the market. In the digital world, you know, they are flourishing a little bit everywhere. Obviously, the survival is to the fittest, but I think it's in the soft economy where that greater opportunity is. And the softer economy is the economy of the future anyhow.
And you see venture capitalists too coming in, because
exactly.
they see opportunity.
Right.
Chaka, you would like to add something?
Yeah, for this question, I want to move a little bit away from the GCC, just because we saw in the survey that the majority of youth do believe they do have opportunity, and Mr. Hada was mentioning about the low interest. But let's move to the like Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, I think this is where entrepreneurship needs a backing up from all Arab countries. I mean, we still don't see in Lebanon or Egypt, I don't know about Egypt, but definitely Lebanon, Palestine, we still don't see that low interest loans available or that encouragement for projects to start so they create jobs. And we can take the UAE as a model for this, and we saw in the survey that most people in the GCC and in the UAE do believe there are opportunities. And since the UAE in the survey is the most favorable country for people to start a business in, then we need to actually learn from what has the UAE been doing right and apply that to the countries that are of a bigger concern right now, because we can link this to the lack of opportunity to terrorism. So it all becomes one chain.
I think that's a very good note to end on. Please join me in thanking our panel members, and we hope you had a good time. Thank you.
Mr. Khalid, Sarah, Roy, and Shakar. I also like to thank Ala for a wonderfully moderated panel discussion. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues in ASDA'A Burson-Marsteller, Burson-Marsteller Worldwide, Pension Berland, as well as the event organizers today, including Rima Weiss and her colleague doing the translation there. I don't know how many of you used it, but round of applause for Rima Weiss there. We have served dessert in the foyer. We'd like you to leave our launch event with a sweet feeling. So please do join us for dessert outside. But I just wanted to assure the panel speakers that yes, we had a thinner audience, but a really interested audience around here. But we had millions of people watching our live broadcast. And this broadcast will be on our website for a good 12 months. So you can well imagine that what we discussed today will be heard by a lot more people. So thank you very much, panelists, and thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We'll see you in 1 year, inshallah.